Hey there, everybody. It's Monday, 27th, and we have a bit of a break in the weather. Recent warmer front moved through, brought with it some rain, which helped to warm the soil back up enough for me to feel comfortable digging in it with my hands again. Now, we are down in the woods, so a lot of the soil is more friable than it is up in the field up there, just where the compaction is and where there is less three-dimensional space that holds those pockets of warm air or warm water or just warm microclimates. Uh, so generally pretty easily diggable in the woods. The soil is sandy and pretty friable, and we're going through. Fall is a really good time to go through if you're in the Northeast and you have the invasive euonymus, the burning bush. That is Euonymus alatus. Alatus? Speller, not a pronouncer. But if you have that plant, fall is a really good time to walk through. You'll see those waxy leaves pop very, very distinctly against the brown background. And because everything is going to sleep and pouring that energy into the roots, it's a great time to replace those when you do end up pulling them or finding them. It's a great time to replace those with a more native plant. So let's take a look. I've turned the camera around, and the sharpest eyed of you may be able to pick out those waxy opposite green leaves. The sun is not great, so if you can't see them, that's okay. We'll give it a few more seconds for people to try and spot them. Let's zoom in a little bit. Can you see it now? It's that right there. That's not the only one. I'm going to zoom back out just for motion sickness sake. So I pulled out this guy. You can see the root mass. That was down in here, nestled comfortably between and betwixt these two intertwining roots. So I've pulled that one. And you can see this one, but just to the side of it, because this is a running, not really running, it is a mat forming, thicket forming clumper. And so whenever you see one, you're likely to see more than one. And so we'll just come in here a little bit. I don't normally advocate for the pulling of plants. I'd much rather nick them or cut them where stem meets soil. For some plants, that will help to starve them out. But for the euonymus, it seems as though the act of doing that spurs a greater thicket formation response. And so if you nick it at the ground and you cut it off, you're going to see many, many, many more stems come up, and you may not catch them all. And because they're so adapted to growing in shade, you may miss them and then have to combat more and more and more as you go. And so, boop, that comes out. That comes out. It's super easy the day after a rainstorm because the ground will give way. And if you've had recent freezes or thaws, even more so, because that flex will allow the plants to just be given up by the ground. So let's talk about what we're replacing them with. Back at the base of this tree now, and you can see just next to it, I have just barely sunk our garden spade into the soil. I have a little bit of room to wiggle it. You can see the gap that I'm able to make, but that's about as far as I plan on going. And we have in here one of my little service berries. So, service berry. It is Amelanchier canadensis. I've heard from a number of people that these are pretty good at growing and producing fruit even in the shade. I have had somewhat poor results up in the field, but it's also around a ton of apple trees, both ours and our neighbors. So it's possible that there's just a really good chance for the apple curculio to take advantage of that situation. So perhaps a little bit more spacing between them is appropriate. So we are here at the base of this bifurcated American beech, Fagus grandifolia. And what we're going to do is take this little guy out of its pot, stick it in the ground there, and cover it back up with all of this detritus, all of this mulch material, this forest duff that is going to blanket and protect it over the winter. And my hope is that as these trees are sending signals to dig deeper for the warmth, it will encourage this little guy to do the same due to its proximity. So give me just a moment. We'll take a look at the roots before I stick it in the ground, and then we'll talk about one more thing, I guess. Yeah. There's just a tiny little frozen core of potting mix stuck to the very center of that cutting. But this is one of the volunteers that we nicked off of a potted Amelanchier at the very end of last season. And we buried it. It had some of this root formation, but not all of it. And so we buried it, and then we repotted it, and given the lack of sun and the washing of nutrient out of the pots, it didn't grow too much, but it did seek out a whole lot of space. So we have a fairly good root structure here. I don't want to be too rough with it because the water is way up that way, and I was poorly planned and prepared for this. But what we're going to do is rock this shovel just a little bit further. We'll pull it just a little bit this way. And we have this nice little channel here. And so what we're going to do, as gingerly as I can manage it, is just kind of line up where the roots are. And you can see them coming up the stem to about here. And that's okay for where it starts to hit the soil line by the duff. So we'll give these guys a little bit of a gentle push down. And then we're just going to really firmly tamp this all back down. You can see that little hint of a root in here sneaking out. And so we'll just kind of right up around it, just like that. And again, it's not packing everything down mulch-wise. So if you have a really dense mulch, you have a higher instance of that freezing together. And so if you create air pockets through partially crumpled and folded leaves, you're actually going to create a better insulative space around any of your sensitive or new plantings. And some of you may be saying, well, those beech trees, they sure do cast a lot of shade, so why are you planting it under it? And the answer is, they do. But this beech tree doesn't have to stay this size. My plan is to cut it pretty low down, sort of a coppice type of deal, not a pollard. A pollard would be further up, maybe like before where the crotch is, and that could give a better structure possibly to the tree, whereas this, you can see the the branch or the bark enclosure. So I'm not crazy about this shape, as these two sprigs, as these two leading, competing leads travel up and gain girth, they're going to close in around this and be a site for rot or infection or some other trouble. So I may as well adjust it. I'm not going to do it right now. I have a whole bunch of other things to plant too. We'll try to make a little super clip of that, I guess, if I can find my little tripod guy. Look at him. Like he owns the place. So what we'll do is we'll cut this low, and in the spring it'll shoot back up. We'll get a whole bunch of smaller upward growth sprigs down here that will compete for becoming the new dominant leader. And what that will also do is give me a ton of cuttable, trimmable material with which to feed this Amelanchier. We're also going to release sun access by pruning this. And I have a few others. You may notice we have a whole lot of beech. Those of you who are not here for some of the videos in the height of season, you may have trouble recognizing. But you can see these gigantic spears right here. Beech. And so we're going to continue going through, but we'll show you guys, you folks, what this looks like for sure come spring. But I have a few more. We have a whole bunch of things that are going to get cut out and split. And my goal for the next upcoming growing season is to take a lot of these forsythia that are not providing the same kind of ecological value that an Amelanchier or a Lindera or a Calycanthus would, and start to replace some of these exotic plants that are great for biomass production and easily cuttable and droppable. And I think that that will be a good way of pushing the food forest in a forest a little further and a little bit more intentionally as we start to develop the real, mostly permanent structure. So I hope that gives you some idea of a way that you could start to push your designs further and kind of right fit the nurse plant that you're aiming to work with and your supplemental plant. As the intentional plants grow, we can start to see them performing their suckering habit and beginning to fill the space in alongside our own efforts of trimming out the plants that are not contributing to the system in the same way. So I hope that's helpful. I hope you all are well and doing good. Until next time, thanks for watching. Happy planting.